As long as we can remember, the humans always wondered what's going on inside the brain and how does it work. And in recent years, we finally discovered the beautiful relationship between the electricity and the brain. And since we now know that they have a relationship between one another, we've discovered, or not discovered, but we have constructed a tool to help us exploit that relationship. That tool is known as an electroencephalograph, otherwise known as an EEG. In this speech, I will expand upon the general knowledge of an EEG and the different uses that we use it for. To do that, we'll first discuss the general principles of an EEG and the signal generation in your brain. Next, we'll move on to the different brainwave types and how an EEG picks up on those. And lastly, we'll talk about the uses of an EEG that are practical to us today. So, for the first topic we need to talk about the different principles of an EEG and how it works. If you ask anyone how an EEG works, they'll probably say you put it on your head and it picks up electrical signals, and that's true. However, we need to dive a little deeper. First, we need to understand what a synapse is and how it creates an electrical current. According to the Journal of Clinical Neurophysiology, Volume 23, Number 23, June 2006, the electrical impulses originate by creating tiny currents of ions which flow between the synapse gaps. So I guess we need to understand what a synapse gap is. Basically, you have neurons in your brain, and in between the neurons there's a little tiny gap, and that's called the synapse gap. And according to this quote, what happens is ions are injected into one of the synapses. They're emitted from one and injected into the other, and that creates a current flow. And anytime you ever have current, you have a difference in potential, and that's how you get current to flow. And so the EEG exploits that. What it does is it takes the potential of all the snaps firing in one area and compares it to the reference in another. To help further explain this, I have this. Alright, so what we have here is we have the neurons and we have this little synapse, and that's easy to see. And so when the current fires, it creates this potential difference between different areas of the brain. This is positive, this is negative. So what we do is we have an electrode on the scalp, and then we have another electrode also on the scalp, usually somewhere kind of close by, maybe the earlobe, and that's used as a reference because there's no snaps there. It's not going to change in voltage potential. That's our ground, that's our reference. We compare everything to it. So when you have someone do something such as blink, think about running, think about writing a poem, different areas of the brain are firing different neurons. So you put the electrode on the part you're interested in, have them think a certain thought, and then the EEG will pick up on this tiny little voltages differences between the ear and then the voltage. And to help demonstrate what an electrode looks like, we have this. So an electrode is simply nothing more than a metal plate and then affixed to your head. And then on the back side, it depends if this is an active or a passive electrode. But anyways, on the back side you'll have electronics which amplify and help filter the electrode. And then on the back you'll have cords coming out and going to the computer for signal processing. So how big are the signals that come out of an EEG? So they're actually quite small, and that is why EEG signal processing is such a huge deal. Because the voltage signals are about 5 to 20 microvolts, that's pretty small. To put it in comparison, an EKG, which measures your heartbeat, your heart rate, the signals for that are roughly in the millivolt range, which is bare minimum 1,000 times larger than the EEG signal that you get from your brain. So that causes the major problem of noise interference, and since the signals are so small. And the major culprit for injecting noise into your electrode is actually all the power around us. Anywhere in the United States that's hooked up to the power grid has a frequency of 60 hertz. So every wire in every room, all the lights, they're oscillating at a 60 hertz frequency. So they're acting as radio broadcasting. And your little tiny electrode is just a wonderful little receiver, and it picks up all that noise and drowns out your signal. So that is why EEGs are so expensive, is because there's such high emphasis placed on the filtering out of the noise, as well as the amplification of the original signal. So now that we know the basic principles of an EEG and how the signal originates, let's look at the different waveforms that an EEG can pick up on. There are mainly 5 waveforms that an EEG can pick up on that are very commonly accepted. It's the alpha, the beta, the gamma, the delta, and the theta. Every now and then you'll hear about another one or two, maybe a mu every now and then, but it's across the board, people don't really agree on it as much, so we'll just stick with the 5. So let's look at the alpha waveform. The alpha waveform, if you read any research paper, it will most likely be talking about the alpha waveform, because the alpha waveform has the highest intensity, as in power-wise, and it's the easiest to generate. For someone to create an alpha waveform, you have to sit in a chair, close your eyes, relax. Don't think about anything. And that is how you create an alpha waveform. The alpha waveform directly relates to how relaxed you are, as long as you're in a waking state. And that's pretty easy to pick up on. The next one is the beta waveform. So if you were to go pick up an EEG, throw it on, look at the waveform, 98% of the time you'll be looking at a beta waveform. And that is because the beta waveform is directly related to your cognitive ability, as in how much attention you have, how alert you are, and your logical process. So you'd think if someone has a really strong beta waveform, they'd be just the greatest person in the world. However, the beta waveform is a double-edged sword, because if you have a really high intensity beta waveform, that's a cue or a clue that you could be having a very high stress life, because you're thinking about things too often, too much, and too hard, and you need to relax more. The other two, the delta and theta waveforms, I lump into the same category roughly, because they're both the same. The delta waveform deals with when you're in a really deep sleep or you're unconscious. It's your slowest waveform, and that's what you look at for sleep analysis. The theta waveform now is more, it's right beneath the alpha waveform, so the conscious relaxation, but you're not yet at the verge of the deep sleep either. So that's when you're being hypnotized, or if you're lucid dreaming, or you're just right on the verge of sleep. Maybe the REM cycle. That's where you'll get your theta waveforms. And finally, there's the gamma waveform, which is the highest, the fastest frequency waveform. And this one's a little newer. People don't have quite as much groundwork into this is what it is officially related to. But as of now, you can generally assume that the gamma waveform is related to really intense thinking processes. If you're trying to solve a problem that's really difficult, you'll probably see a little bit of gamma waveforms. So now that we know the basic principles of an EEG, and we know the different types of waveforms, let's look at all the different uses of an EEG. So when everyone says an EEG, I know what that's used for, medical field. Bingo, you got it. The medical field is probably almost all of the EEG uses, and for good reason. Because if someone who has a very high anxiety disorder, they can go in, put on an EEG, go through some training, and they'll sit there and they will focus on trying to create the alpha waveforms to try and help relax them. Another big endeavor or research into for the medical field is the learning disabilities or the different diseases of the brain, as for epilepsy, Alzheimer's, ADHD. According to Pop Jordanova in the Prelosy Journal in 2005, there's a wide consensus that the delta or theta excess and the alpha and beta deficits are commonly encountered in children with learning disabilities. The main focus of this journal was focused on children with ADHD, and so they would have them come in for a year, and they did 40 minutes a day, and they had them sit through and they had them concentrate on enhancing their alpha and beta waveforms to try and enhance their learning in schools. So now that we know the different uses of the EEG, let's recap what we learned. Number 1, we learned the basic principles and the signals. Number 2, we learned all the different types of signals that the EEG can pick up on. And 3, we learned about the different uses of an EEG that there are today. So although we don't know everything about the brain, and we're still expanding upon it, now you know a little bit more about a tool that we use to probe it.